Hey everybody, welcome to my garage. This is episode 9 of the reflooring project. In this episode, you're going to see the prep work and the steps I did to repaint all of the doors from a white to that kind of taupe color that I'm going to be replacing everything with. Enjoy, and again, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit like and subscribe if you like this video series. Thanks. Hey everybody, I'm going to show you how I am painting the doors. It may not be how you choose to do it. Some people prefer spraying over brush and rollers, but that's what I'm using because I have so many doors to do, and because they're relatively large doors. So spraying it, I just don't have the room to spray, and the weather doesn't cooperate all the time to spray. So I'm doing a brushing and rolling finish on these. So first of all, these doors are hollow core doors. They're pretty cheap doors. I'm going to try to get the light angle on here. If you can see, you see right here where the light is shining. There's some imperfections. I sanded down as much as I could. You can see there's lots of sanding dust on here. There were some holes or marks in it that I cleaned up, so I filled those with putty. I'll show you that one. This one here had some vertical lines, so I sanded them as smooth as I could get them. One of the key things I'm doing on this door, which I still have to sand this one a little bit better, is the edges of this door. These doors are very cheap. They're very rough. So the paint and the wood that was on here is very, 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 very rough. So I'm sanding these edges and rounding them a little bit so that your clothes and your skin don't get stuck on it. Yeah, this area is very, very rough right here. So I'll give those another sanding just to smooth those down a little bit before I move on to the next step. All right, so I finished sanding the edges a lot smoother. Get against the light again here. You can see that there's a lot of sawdust. So you want to have the surface be as clean as possible. I usually start in the center and work my way to the edges, specifically getting out any dust or particles inside of these finished edges in here. So I will dust this as best as I could by hand with a dry duster. Once again, you can see how horrible this door surface is. It's just because it's a cheap door. I've always kind of had the saying, you paint crap, it's still crap. It's just painted. So, the quality of these doors aren't good. I'm going to paint them as best as I could to get the best finish I can. But aside from replacing all the doors with a better product, which I don't have in my budget to do, it's just a matter of painting them and getting the best finish you could get on them. You can't sand these doors down too much, or you start getting to the raw wood, which is just compressed particle board, and it doesn't sand well. So you have to be careful about how deep you're going with the sanding on these doors for them to still look good. So, like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out as much of the dust as I can by dry brushing, dry wiping it. And then what I will do is I will go back with air. I've used a vacuum to blow it, but I didn't have much sanding on these as far as sand dust goes. So I'll probably just blow it with my mouth to get any final last pieces of loose particles off of this to get the best finish possible. I'm going to have to do a priming coat, and so I'll sand again after the priming coat. So if any pieces of dust or hair or anything are still on this when I do the priming coat, I'll sand them off when I sand after the first coat. But once again, I will just dry wipe them and then give a blow with my mouth just to get any other loose particles off, and then we'll start the primer coat. Hey everybody, So I've poured the paint into the tray, and I gotta say this paint is a little thicker than I want it to be because I'm getting down to the bottom of the gallon of paint. So it's been exposed to air a lot and it's a little thick. I'm gonna go ahead and put the first coat of what I call color primer on with this last gallon. But if the rolling part goes on a little thick, I may end up calling it quits on this gallon of paint and getting a fresh gallon of paint to do the finish coat or coats so that it's a little looser and goes on a little bit better. But we'll see once we get this first coat on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the indentation part of the doors here. Honestly, I don't know what it's called. I'll look it up. I want to try to keep it as smooth as you can, so you get rid of as many brush strokes as you could. You don't want thick brush strokes. You don't want globs of paint, nothing like this, because it will dry like that and make it hard to sand and finish. So anytime there's a glob or you go too far, I just use the brush to feather it out and thin it out. So as long as it's feathered and thin like this, you could sand the edges briefly and it should be easy to put on the final coat. The key with the paint is to blend it as much as you can. Blending it meaning thick and thin areas, blend it so it's all evenly. You don't want ridges, you don't want brush strokes. That's the key thing to keep in mind. So I'll put it on a little bit sloppily, meaning that I'm not too worried about getting rid of all brush strokes because this is going to be the undercoat. So the main thing I do, like I told you, is I just smooth it out and I feather it out a little bit just so that there's no brush strokes or edge glob lines that I have to worry about later. So the first thing I will do is I will paint the inside edge here with a brush because it's hard to do with the roller. And then once I finish doing both panels, I will go back and use the roller to do the inside panel, flat parts, and the outside edge, outside of the panels. So we'll do that next. So, for example, you can see inside this panel here, there's some globbing here, there's some thick brush marks here. That's what you don't want to have. So I'll go back over that with the brush, go the opposite way so it doesn't pull the paint. And when that's all done, you can see that those globs are gone and it's a nice flat level layer of paint. Okay, I have the panel indentations complete, and now I'm going to roll the flat part. So to do this, I'm using a 1-inch foam roller. That's what I found works best for these flat door surfaces. So I will go ahead and get a good layer of paint on the roller and just start rolling the panel out. So it takes a lot of paint, unfortunately, to put this on here to get a good covering. I'm not real concerned about roller lines and directional of the rollers, at least on this first coat, because again, this is really just to get the coverage and get the white covered up. But I do watch for things like this, like roller lines. You want to at least smooth those out by rolling over it. Make sure there's no gloppy lines or no thick roller edges because, again, otherwise you're going to have to sand those down later on before the final coat. So the main idea is to just get the white covered with this coat and, try not to have too much white exposed. As this starts to lay out and flatten out, some of the white will start to show through, and that's okay. That's why it's a first coat. Second coat and or third coat, if it's needed, will cover up those white marks and smooth everything out. It actually goes on pretty easily. Like I told you though, the paint's getting a little thick right now at the bottom of the gallon. So you do have to work a little harder right now to roll this out. Fresh can of paint definitely goes on a little easier. And that's why I mentioned earlier that, this may be the last pour from this gallon. So what I do is once the panel section is complete, I like to come over here and get this angle with the light reflecting on it, because if you look, you could see the roller lines and the roller levels. And I kind of now just like to kind of go back and forth lightly to get all the lines going the same way and smooth everything out. So I kind of just do that to even everything out and then let it go. You can't keep going over it. The more you go over it, the more lines you get. Some of it's starting to dry already. It becomes more difficult to get a good finish. So you have to learn when you paint, especially big flat surfaces, that you have to quit, you have to walk away. Once you get it covered, let it go, walk away, sand it, fix it with the next coat if you need to. So now I'll go ahead and do this other panel and then the outside edges. When doing the edges, you do roll in the same direction for the entire edge. Don't go this way and that way, because again, you get weird roller lines, so try to keep everything going the same way. The other thing is, when I painted the first side, I painted the outside edges with 2 coats, but I want to get a nice painted edge around the edge of this door. So I will go back and paint this edge and roll the edge just to get a nice clean finish. The other thing is, when you get to the corner, I usually like to go, like I said, the same direction. I'll probably go the opposite direction here, so that again I'm rolling down the edge, but I will kind of angle it like this, so there's not a hard transition between a vertical roll and a horizontal roll. I'll kind of fan it out like this just so it gets a bit better finish. So here you have the finished first coat of paint. You can see as the light reflects on it, there's some roller lines. Those will flatten out a little bit as it dries, but like I mentioned earlier, don't go over it. You have to let the paint dry. You can't start putting a second coat or doing touch-ups on a wet surface, or it just creates more and more problems with the paint not laying right. So I'm going to back off from this one, not worry about any imperfections, let this coat dry thoroughly before I sand it lightly and do another coat on it. So, let me see if I can find some areas. There's some areas where it's not totally covered, but like I said, the second coat will take care of those. Definitely need 2 coats, especially you can see like right here through these uneven areas where you use the brush. Those are definitely going to need a second coat. I also want to point out that I've gotten pretty good at determining how much paint to pour for a single coat of paint for a full door. So I have very little waste. And yeah, you could put that waste back in the can. That's why this is getting a little thicker, because some of this stuff has been recycled back in multiple times. But if I pour right and I use the right amount of paint for a single coat on a door this size, I have very little paint left. Let me get under the light better. I have very little paint left in the tray. And what I'll do here is I'll go upstairs with the brush, and any touch-up areas that need extra touch-up with a brush, I'll use this little bit of paint left in the tray for that, so that there's very little waste or very little recycling of paint. So always try to keep that in mind. The less you have to keep pouring back into the can, the better the condition of the paint is. The first coat dried really well, actually probably more than needed, because it's been a couple weeks actually since I've done this first coat. Usually I do it the next day, but life happens, and this door has been sitting down here in the basement for a while now. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a really fine grit sandpaper, go over the entire surface to get off any burrs or any bumps from the paint. I feel like a few little ones every now and then. Some areas that might need a heavier sanding, because maybe of a mar in the wood or a drip of paint that's a little bit thicker that this fine sandpaper won't take off. I'll use a little heavier grit in those select areas if I come across something. Looking at the door, and you see me looking, what I like to do is I got the bright lights back there, and they reflect on the door really well, so you can see all the imperfections very clearly in the light. Like I see a little drip here, I see a bump here, so it's just a way for me to kind of see all those little imperfections, and that's how I identify where I have to sand a little harder. So I'm going to do the sanding. I'll show you how I do it a little bit. It's just really light. I don't push hardly at all because I don't want to take off much of this first coat. Otherwise, when I put in the second coat, if I sand this down to primer, then when I put that second coat on, really where that primer is, it's just the first coat. So it's not an even coat. So this is just to take off any raised surfaces, not really meant to take off paint at all. So that's what I'm going to do. And because I'm sanding, as you can see, there's a light layer of dust on the door again that I will once again have to wipe and dust off before I paint again. I'll also sand a little bit inside these you could see where there was some raised paint, so when I sanded it, it took it off, brought it back down to the primer. So I'll just have to make sure I put the final coat on pretty thick there to cover that up. But you could also see where I used the brush in these areas. You could see that the brush didn't cover as well, but the second coat should cover that perfectly well. I'll put it on a little thicker. There's a couple areas like this where I touched it. It looks like it took off the first coat. That's why you do 2 coats. So just to kind of give you an idea when I was talking about the light. So see if you have the bright light and you get the light to reflect on the surface like this, you can see all the imperfections a lot easier. So what I'll do now is I will do a second coat on the inside here, and then I will do a second coat on the panels and the perimeter with a roller. And if it dries good, this door will be done, but I'll check it again just in case. It might need another light sanding and another light coat or a third coat. Just depends. I've been getting pretty lucky. Most of these have been getting completed with just 2 coats. Okay, so here we are with the second and hopefully final coat on. And once again, I'm using the light shine test here just to make sure that it looks like a nice even coat and that there's no roller marks or really apparent roller marks or paint glops or paint drops. So, as you can see, it all is reflecting relatively even. And, again, as the paint dries, it'll settle or lay down a little bit. So hopefully this will be a nice, good, smooth, semi-gloss finish when this is done. Hope you enjoyed the episode. And for now, the garage is closed.